Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Defending Your Policyholders from Your Competitors, brought to you by Precisely. Today, we will hear from Director of Insurance and Healthcare Alliances at Precisely, Greg Osborne. Greg will be sharing his insights on the economic cost of non-renewals, the traps set by your competitors to steal policyholders, and solutions for defending your policies in force without breaking the budget. We encourage you to actively participate in this session by asking questions and sharing your own experiences. At the end of the presentation, Greg will be available to answer any questions you may have. With that, I will pass it over to Greg Osborne. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and welcome everybody to our webinar today with the very interesting title, Defending Your Policyholders from Your Competition, which I'm sure all of you are wondering, what is all this about? Well, it's about a topic that I've been researching and thinking about for the last 15 years, and it's on the impact that advertising has on both the shopping and the renewal points in the policy life cycle. And as I go to a lot of insurance conferences and webinars like many of you do, it's something that you don't hear much about. So hopefully you're going to find the information I have on this informative. But also at the end, we're going to share some solutions on what you can do to retain as many of your policyholders as possible. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I would bet that almost everyone on this call today has some form of growth target for 2023. And if you don't personally, you do as part of a bigger organization. And whether your organization and you intend to hit that goal through organic growth, or there's going to be some M&A and you've either already brought in a new book of business or you're going to, it doesn't help if you're losing policyholders out the back end. Now, in the mid to short term, losing those policyholders just makes it so much harder to hit your goal because you've got to replace the ones who left before you can start to get above zero and then to start growing again. But in the long term, you don't need to be an actuary to know that just a small percentage difference in the percentage of policyholders who renew makes a massive difference in 10, 15, 20 years out as you compound that annually over that period. And, I can't find any official publications of renewal rates across the industry. All I have is anecdotal numbers, but, for a best-in-class company that's at the very top of the J.D. Power rankings with policyholders who are bundled with 2 or 3 products, their retention rate is about 97%. And at that rate, I think you could sleep fairly well at night knowing that you've got a good solid business and a good, platform to grow in future years. But the average for most auto and home carriers, particularly in the US, is about 10 points lower than that. At about 87% is considered to be about average or good for retention. So you're losing 13% of your policyholders every year. To validate that, I heard a CEO of a large tier 1 on stage say that their retention rate was 84%. So around that ballpark is where probably a lot of those carriers fall. On the other side of the spectrum, there was a recent filing by a very high-profile insurtech who reported that their retention rate on their renters book of business was about 55%. So they're losing or canceling 45% of their policyholders every year. And can you imagine having to replace almost half your book before you could start again? So whatever percentage it is, it translates into tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that's lost or gone to the competition, or with the largest carriers, there's actually billions of dollars. So any way you look at it, there's some very large numbers at stake here. But to understand this properly, we need to take a couple of steps back and look at the industry overall. And the insurance, property and casualty industry is what I call a zero-sum game. And what I mean by that, it's not a high-growth industry. And if you look at this chart or this map here from the Swiss Re Institute, it shows the growth in non-life, as they call it in Western Europe, or property and casualty or general insurance across the world. And you can see that the United States here, the United Kingdom, Australia, a lot of mature, developed economies, their growth rates are in this 2.5% to 5% range. So, it's good, modest growth, but it's definitely not a big growth story. I will point out that it does have China in the pink or the negative, but I can assure you that was a one-year anomaly because of the COVID lockdowns, and normally China would be here in this 10 to 20% range. But overall, North America net is generally in a relatively flat level like that. And the reason for that is simple. It all comes back to the underlying population in any particular market. And, it's no secret in the United States that population rate is coming down for years and years, not just because of COVID, but it's been a long-term trend, as it has in Japan and Western Europe and most other developed countries. And what happens is that overflows into things like the number of vehicles per 1,000 people, which is a leading indicator for things like insurance, as people buy new cars that weren't there before and they go into the market, not just as a replacement, but as a net new vehicle. And in the United States, the rate has hovered between 8 and 900. Unfortunately, this chart here from the Department of Energy, I couldn't find one to 2022, but I would bet, again, with the supply chain issues and the restriction on new vehicles, that rate is still around that same level today. Similarly, in the number of households, that also is fairly stagnant. Now, I know this scale on this graph here makes it look like it's going up, but if you do the math on that time period of 23 years, it works out at a compound rate of around 1%. So bottom line is the number of new households, the couples getting together, individuals getting their first home, that number is a leading indicator for people, net new people needing renters insurance and homeowners insurance and things like that, that those things are relatively flat. And that is reflected when you look at the results of some of the largest property and casualty carriers in the United States over what I call the lost decade, coming out of the global financial crisis up to today, where the results of a lot of those companies, again, it's modest growth, 4-5%, park. And when you're running a $50-60 billion business, that's quite an achievement, but it's not what we see like with these two companies. So in that same market, there are two companies, Berkshire Hathaway, which is primarily Geico, and Progressive in the dark blue line, that have absolutely outpaced the rest of the market and busted out of the groove and are showing incredible growth over the last 20 years, right? Those companies have been around 80 years in total, but in the last few years. And how is it in a market that is not really growing, unless you're talking about pet insurance or cyber or flood, lines of business that people haven't traditionally spent much on, how is it that these two companies have managed to grow at these incredible rates? And the answer is, besides of having a very efficient direct model, of having good technology, but the real answer is they have found a model or a business model of how to find and recruit new policyholders away from other carriers and bring them over to them and convert them into policyholders at a very efficient rate, such that they can keep their acquisition costs well below the lifetime value and make that into a good business. And the engine that's behind all that is advertising. So when you look at the top advertising spenders for 2021 in the United States, according to Ad Age, Geico or Berkshire Hathaway is here at about $2.5 billion per year in advertising, and Progressive is around $2.1 billion. So amongst the biggest advertisers, Progressive spending more than Pepsi on advertising. And when we look at Berkshire Hathaway, there's two interesting things. The first is that the year before Berkshire Hathaway made their first investment in them, which was 1995, they spent only $33 million on advertising. That's million, not billion, 33 million in advertising. And every single year since then, they have progressively, excuse the pun, but they have increased that number every year. And if you read many of Warren Buffett's letters to his shareholders, he talks about the importance of advertising for finding new leads and converting policyholders over to them, and how critical and how they're willing to continue to invest in that as the main engine for bringing in new policyholders. Similarly, with Progressive has shown incredible growth, as we'll talk about through the years, through that advertising. And what this does is collectively, it leads to what you might call either a virtuous or a vicious cycle where everyone else in the market is now under pressure to meet those levels. So I remember the year like about 2008, 2009, when State Farm first announced that they were committing to spend more than $1 billion in advertising. And today we have Allstate and State Farm and all these companies spending more than $1 billion, so that collectively they're all spending over $10 billion in 2021. Now, I will caveat this by saying, and I don't have the full numbers for 2022 yet, but AM Best has reported that there was an 18% drop-off in advertising last year in 2022 as carriers were faced with higher severity costs on claims, on repair costs, on used vehicle, supply chain issues, lumber costs in the building industry, and so on. So a lot of those companies did cut back on their media spend in order to help with their profitability. But in the long scheme of things, that is absolutely a blip, and as supply chain issues and those other things all get resolved, I absolutely see them coming back and will, get back to the normal levels. But there definitely was a drop. Some companies like Progressive only came down by 5%, but as I said, AM Best reported it at 18% overall. And a perfect example of what this can do is this announcement from December last year that Progressive had surpassed State Farm as the #1 auto insurer in the United States, a title that State Farm had held since as long as I've been alive, or as long as I can remember. And, that is a huge achievement. And obviously they did it on the back of a good product, a good customer experience, but that $2 billion advertising spend is definitely a huge part of this story and what helped them to get to that, incredible level. And the thing is, it's not just in the hyper-competitive auto insurance where you see this, right? You take another area like small commercial, where every time I open up YouTube, I swear I see a Next Insurance ad. And I have heard that they have been single-handedly responsible for quadrupling the cost of YouTube ad prices due to their massive media spend on those type of digital platforms. And we'll talk about InsurTechs in a minute, but they are absolutely another factor bringing these types of competitive levels into other lines of business other than just auto and home. So how does all this work, and why do companies spend all this money? So to understand this, let's take a quick look at the life of an average consumer and how they consume insurance in the United States today. This is Joe. He just got home from work, he's had dinner, and now he's ready to kick back and enjoy some of his favorite streaming services. But no matter what he watches, there are insurance ads everywhere.
Research shows people remember ads.
She's all yours.
From becoming your parent.
I'll say it's time.
And he doesn't think much about it. They made him laugh. He had a smile. In fact, they didn't even mention price. But most importantly, he remembered their name. And this happens 365 days of the year. A few months later, Joe is paying his bills and he thinks to himself, wow, This insurance has got really expensive. What was the name of that insurance company again? And just like that, he switched over to a site where he's now comparing insurance quotes, giving preference to the brands that he remembers from the ads. Joe has bought himself a new policy and he's moved on, never to be seen again. And his old carrier, who never shows ads, is asking themselves, what did we do wrong? I thought he was so happy. They just couldn't compete. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how it all works. The advertisers don't really expect that you're ready to switch insurance then and there, but if they can put their ads in front of you enough times over a year or several years, and they make you smile and you have happy thoughts about them, that their name will be at the top of your list when the time does come for you to look for new insurance. I'm sure there's lots of you who have been listening to what I've said so far and are thinking to yourselves, Greg, I don't get it. What's the problem? Advertising is a fundamental part of capitalism and, Procter and Gamble and McDonald's and and Coca-Cola. Everybody advertises, even Precisely advertises. So what's your issue? My issue is this, all right? This chart here, this pyramid representing all of the carriers in the property and casualty market here in the US. And, there's 25 tier ones, and then there's about 2,500 carriers in total. But at this upper level, you've got this group of companies that is has the resources to be able to spend that kind of order of magnitude money, 9 digits, $1 billion or more in advertising. And if they're just taking policyholders away from each other, fair enough. But the reality is that so many of these policyholders who are coming into here through these advertising campaigns are coming from the mutuals, from the farm bureaus, from the AAAs, and all the other carriers who don't have the capacity to have a 9-digit advertising budget, let alone even 100 million, because that's larger than their premium in total. So it is a bit of an unfair battle. And as you see the concentration of carriers, according to NAIC, about 55%, the top 4 carriers constitute 55% of all the premium for auto and home in the US. But you go to many individual states, and that percentage concentration is in the 70 to 80% range. And it only makes common sense that that concentration is going to get higher and higher as they're able to continue to take those resources and convert more and more policies and take them into the tier ones. But that's not all. At the bottom end, we have a relatively new phenomenon from the last 5 years or so of insurtechs, which are new startups with great new business models, mostly around apps and things like that, that are bringing into the insurance industry. And a lot of these guys are funded by billions of dollars of private equity or venture capital money. And they are doing the same thing. Many of these companies rely upon advertising, more digital than mass media, to get their customers, as that's their only way, particularly for those that are going direct. And, I mentioned the Next Insurance before, but look at the Lemonades, the Metro Miles, the Roots, all those kind of guys, and their advertising spend is often in the 20-something% range, spending 20% or so of their premiums on sales and marketing, and a lot of that going to this advertising. So if you're one of these carriers in the middle, that means that you're being attacked by both sides, from the guys at the very top with the billion-dollar budgets and from those at the bottom who are being funded by outside interest, all attacking and trying to take those policyholders from you. So when you sit back and think about all what I've talked about, how are you going to put a moat around your business, around the policyholders that you cherish the most, to defend them so that you can keep as many of those policyholders and have a healthy business going into the future? Well, as we look at that, I want to share with you my kind of model for how I think about the year in the life of an average policyholder. And imagine that you're a policyholder whose main interaction with your carrier is paying your premium through a direct debit or a credit card charge. But other than that, you don't have much interaction with your contact center or the agent, whatever the case may be. But every single day, every single week, you are getting bombarded by all this media advertising as they go about their lives, encouraging them to switch. And I would argue that over the course of time, with the absence of any other interactions, the likelihood that they're going to renew deteriorates as over time they think more about how much this is costing them than all the benefits that you give them. Now, in the event that they actually have a claim, and you do a really good job of meeting the promise of their policy, and you could actually seal them as a customer for life, a lifetime partner who'll trust you, who'll have loyalty to you, maybe through some little bumps in the road, but they will stay with you and you have that long-term relationship with them if they have a good experience. On the flip side, if they have a poor claims experience, the opposite could happen, and you could absolutely send them shopping for a new policy at the end of it, which according to JD Power is the #1 reason for people to go shopping, followed closely by a large premium increase. But either way, those two events of a claim or the event of a claim can have a huge impact on the renewal. But the reality is most policyholders, fortunately, in most years don't have a claim. So how can you move the needle? How can you influence and counteract all of these influences from the mass media and the digital advertising that they're consuming throughout the year? Well, the answer is a technology we call personalized interactive advertising, or PIA, which, as you'll hear, has been shown to be able to boost renewal rates by over 10%. All right, so 60, 90 days out, you send a personalized targeted ad directly to the policyholders who you cherish the most to resell them on all the benefits of what they have with you and the reasons they should stay, as well as maybe opportunities to upsell them during that renewal cycle. And the important thing to know about this is that this is not just a static ad like you would watch on YouTube or on regular TV. This is completely personalized with their name in the video, their number of years of being a policyholder, the date of their renewal, and all these kinds of things. But it's also interactive in that they can interact with the video, they can jump around and learn about different coverages or options that they may have, or they can even link out to external sites like your billing portal or things like that, and create such an immersive experience that's like nothing else you're seeing. So let's actually take a look at 2 examples of these personalized interactive ads to see what I'm talking about.
When it comes to home insurance, at Direct Line, we like to say it how it is. And more importantly, how it is for you. So we'll make it quick and direct so you know where you stand if your home or property encounters a fire, flood, or some other kind of sticky situation. Okay, so you've been with Direct Line for 11 years, and your policy will automatically renew soon, on this date to be precise. It's a super time of year for a renewal, what with all the resolutions and forward thinking. Okay, let's see what your cover looks like. You've got buildings and contents insurance, so it's what's on the inside and outside that counts, but we also mean some of the permanently fixed things inside too. So your home and contents are covered for water damage and theft, storm damage and fire damage to the house. But hedges, fences or gates aren't covered for storm damage. General wear and tear is excluded too. You've got Home Insurance Plus, so you get all our bells and whistles. With accidental damage cover, smashing a window or breaking the TV is of course accidental, so that's covered. But if any damage happens during cleaning or repairing, that's not covered. With your home emergency cover, if you have a problem with your boiler, for example, we're on it. Unless it's economically beyond repair, in which case, we'll give you £250 towards the cost of a new one. We all know accidents happen and life can sometimes feel a little booby-trapped. But if it's someone else's fault, your family legal protection could help. Because we're glass half full people, we'll take on all cases with over 50% chance of winning. When it comes to your personal possessions and something like jewellery, watches or phones are lost, stolen or damaged away from home, we've got you covered. But this excludes sports equipment when in use. If you're happy with your cover, you don't need to do a thing. But if you want to make any changes, just give us a ring. So that's you covered. Here's your policy number if you want to give us a call. Oh, and your renewal pack should have arrived, so do take a look. Give us a thumbs up if this was helpful.
That ad is an example of a personalized interactive ad that was created for an audience of one, the policyholder Sarah, especially made for her. And if you can imagine you were her and you received that, how could you not watch it all the way to the end? The other thing that's an example of is 2D animation and stock video footage, which is in the scheme of things along the simpler end of the complexity that these ads can get. And in case you're wondering, we do have a professional services department and also partners like Direct Connection USA out in California that can help you to create the creative sides of these ads if you don't have those resources in-house. So let's now take a look at another example. This is on the high end of the complexity with an actor on set.
Billy here from Direct Line, and this little film is all about you. So pay attention, and I'll make it swift. Direct Line's been keeping an eye on your place for 4 years now. Insured, covered, put it this way, you're in good hands. Thing is, your policy's due to automatically renew soon. See? Because you're important to Direct Line, I've been sent to personally take you through the small print. Okay. Currently, we've got you sorted for buildings and contents insurance. Decent cover it is too.
As you just saw, that was a much more sophisticated ad in the way that the policyholder's name, Alison, was incorporated onto the GPS, on the post-it note on the fridge, how the date was circled on the calendar, and all the other subtle elements like that to make it really personalized. It was also a really great example of incorporating humor into the ad, just like the tier ones do with theirs. So what is the business outcome of a program like this with Direct Line, who's been using this since 2016? Well, from a recent year in 2021, Direct Line saw a 52% open rate. And if you're in marketing or direct marketing, you'll appreciate that is an extremely high rate. The click-through is also very good, but the completion rate to the end of 66% is very impressive. And finally, the increase in retention of 16% for the policyholders who actually viewed the video is great. Again, I've been at other companies in the past where a 3% rate was celebrated, but a 16% rate is really fantastic. The thing that I'll mention about this is that unlike other general customer experience initiatives where, through a customer experience program, you figure out a couple of hundred or even 1,000, I've seen in some cases, of initiatives that you're going to execute on to improve customer experience, it's very hard to draw a dark, bright line between all of those initiatives and any differences in the retention rate because there's just so many different variables. There are so many different things going, you can't control for it. But in this case, with these interactive ads, you absolutely can, because you can, if you have a population that's statistically significant and you send a control group, their regular renewal information, and you send a test group the video, and for those people who watch the video, what is the differences in the renewal rate compared to those who don't, you absolutely can justify and determine that correlation and build that ROI on the investment it would take for you to do this. Another great example is another direct insurer in the UK called Jeffrey Insurance, and you can see some of the results they got in terms of how many policyholders who said that they thought that the video or the ads helped them to show that they care. The completion rate's a little bit lower, but this uptake in retention at 12%, again, is also very, very impressive. And we have a great case study on our website of Jeffrey Insurance actually talking about this. So to wrap up, I just want to lift the hood for a moment and talk about some of the technologies that are operating in the background. So the solution that we use to create these personalized interactive ads is called Engage One Communicate, and it's a full suite for modern customer communication technologies. And the way that it works is we take a feed from your policy admin or billing system of those people up for renewal. We take that and we use information from predictive models, information you know about them in your CRM, and lastly, anything from your customer experience solutions, such as are they a promoter or a detractor, to filter the list. Because the thing is, you need to be intelligent about who you send this to. You just don't want to send it to everybody, because in some cases you have policyholders who would renew in any way, but you sending them an email could actually trigger a shopping event that you don't want to happen. So use these technologies to filter it, and particularly with the predictive model. In this area, we have partnered with Guidewire, who has come out with a new retention model last year, which is far beyond. Now, retention models are a staple of most machine learning or AI programs at companies, but Guidewire has taken it several steps further in terms of combining it with other data about profitability and coming out with much more precise recommendations on what carriers should do, or their agents, to help retain that book of business, and so to help get a much better result. So that information gets fed into our Communicate product, and it then generates a communication which, depending upon what information you have, in some cases you don't have email addresses or mobile phone numbers, but if you do, you can send them emails, SMSs, or even do in-app pushes to tell them that this personalized ad is now available, and then they can obviously watch it on their phone, their tablet, their laptop, or whatever device that they have. And so collectively, you've got this whole solution here which can deliver these ads, not spending millions of dollars on doing a mass media campaign to tens of thousands of people who aren't even policyholders, but targeting this directly at the policyholders that you already have. So as we finish up, I want to pose to you one final question, and that is, how far are you prepared to go to defend your policyholders? Because like I said at the beginning, this is a topic that doesn't get a lot of attention when I go to conferences and things like that. And why is it? Well, a vice president of a large global tier 1 carrier said to me once, he said, "Greg, people get promoted for selling new business, and they keep their jobs for retaining the existing book of business." And I thought about that, and I thought what that really means is the existing book of business is almost taken for granted or assumed that it's definitely going to renew. But as you heard, there are big carriers and insurtechs with massive resources who have their eyes set on those policyholders, who would love nothing more than to take them away from you. So just like in this picture here of this guy blocking the shot, we all need to play defense as well as offense as we all attempt to make out and achieve our goals here in 2023. So with that, I want to hand it back to Caroline, and let's see what questions we have from our audience.
That was great, Greg. Thank you for that insightful presentation. We can go ahead and move to questions. So you all can feel free to put any question you'd like to ask Greg in the chat box below. We'll go ahead and get started with this.
Okay.
So it looks like our first question is, how do the recent increases in premiums impact all of this?
Well, as I mentioned, the increase in the claims costs and that has forced a lot of carriers to go out to market to increase their rates. And we're seeing double-digit increases across many different states and across many, many different companies. And initially, many insureds will call their agent, they'll call the contact center and ask, hey, what's going on here? They've increased a lot. So that just creates more work for your contact centers. And you can't necessarily reliably be sure that every contact center agent or agent is going to answer those objections well and explain it's an industry-wide phenomenon everyone's hit and try to retain them as a policyholder. The bigger impact is many people don't even bother to do that. They just get their laptop out and just start shopping. And this whole increase in premiums has driven a massive number of people into the market. I think J.D. Power has reported that shopping is at an all-time high right now as people try to see, are there better choices out there? And unfortunately, everyone's raising premiums, so there are not a lot of choices. But this is just making it easier for those companies who have invested in advertising over time, because now they're thinking, okay, what were the names of those companies that I've been hearing about all these years? They're the ones that they'll think about first. So with us, we would say this is an opportunity to use the technology we heard about to proactively tell your insureds, you're up for renewal, your premium's going to go up a bit because of all these reasons that impact everybody, but these are the reasons we are still your best choice and you should still stay with us.
Thank you, Greg. We already have another question. So it looks like, won't the policyholders get tired of watching the same ad every year?
Well, I guess if you only had one ad, that might be the same. Like any kind of media program, we'd encourage you to have, several different versions that are showing. Our system can keep a track of not only what videos, so what ads were sent to them, but which ones are actually watched. So we can rotate them around. And the other thing I'll mention is that, our solution is designed so that the different components can be modular. So you might have about a few different openings that you can choose from, but then maybe the body of the ad is the same, and then maybe have a different ending. And so you don't necessarily need to have all these different ads from start to end, but you can just have a few different openings. But most companies do need to budget to refresh your ads regularly, to stay up to date with your brand and to keep them current so that they don't get too stale.
Okay. So next question is, we have an old mainframe policy admin system. Can we still use this to create ads?
Yes, so you certainly can. And, think of those videos that you just watched. Typically, there's only about 15 to 20 data variables that are either appear on the screen or are used for triggering and things like that. And so we just need to get an extract from your mainframe system or whatever. You don't necessarily need to do it real time. We can take a file and just run it off as a, one time as you do it maybe once a week to do renewals or whatever. But the fact that you're still on a legacy mainframe system would not prevent you from being able to use this. So.
Okay, great. And then it looks like this is our last question. What's the best way to get started, Greg?
So what we recommend is, getting all your main stakeholders, your VP of underwriting, your product managers, your marketing folks, all the people who are typically have KPIs or responsible together to do a workshop to kind of plan out, what are the key messages and the value points and so on, to come up with the storyline, the scripts for what these ads might look like. And again, we do have creative partners that can help with the creative side of things, but a workshop like that, which can be anything from half a day to a couple of days, is definitely the best way to start out to define, what the overall goals and program and what the core message is going to be.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you everyone for your attendance and your insightful questions. Make sure you fill out the survey at the end of the webinar to learn more about Precisely or input any questions you may have for us. That includes the webinar for today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.